Hey everyone, welcome back to the AVO webinar series. This is the 15th webinar in the series, and today we are lucky to be joined by Dr. Leo Venus in Norway. Leo, how are you, man?
Really good, thank you. How are you doing?
Good, good. Thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. For those of you who are not too familiar with the AVO webinar series, basically it's a mix of online tutorials about communication and coaching related to veganism and animal rights. And then we also have interviews with people that I think are really strong communicators. And I came across Leo and some of the work that he does, his YouTube channel, and I was blown away and actually very impressed by the way that you communicate with other people. Actually, I watched a debate that you were in, a discussion slash debate that you were in with Richard with Vegan Gains,
Mm,
and he was coming at you pretty hard, and I was actually pretty impressed the way that you communicated with him, and the way that you tried to get him to see your point of view, which I thought was really interesting. So yeah, that was just a really really cool conversation. So thank you
yeah,
for doing that.
thank you very much. Thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you for that as well. I mean, it wasn't the easiest conversation I've ever had, but it's like you say, we have to try to use the communication that works, and from both my medical journey and from the communication classes and all the teaching that I've received, it's very clear that there's a way that works very well, and there's a way that doesn't work very well, and so we just have to practice to make that theory and that knowledge become a new way of communicating.
So on that note, I know that you're a doctor, you're a medical doctor,
Hmm.
but I heard you mention while you were talking to Richard that you have become interested in, you started doing some reading and research on communication and social psychology, and I'm curious, like,
Hmm.
what got you interested in that in the first place?
So I mean, that's a great question, and the truth is, it's a combination of veganism and medical school. And because in medicine, a lot of the stuff we deal with is behavior change. In the world we live in today, at least in the Western world, 70 to 80% of the disease burden comes from lifestyle-related chronic disease. And so, even though the medical industry, for the most part, tries to throw pills and surgeries and procedures at people, the real cause, the root cause, is lifestyle. And so lifestyle change is the future in this regard. This is where we have the most benefit to extract, right? It's from getting people to change their behaviors. But as you already know, changing people's behaviors is not always the easiest thing. And that's why I think most medical schools around the world now are starting to incorporate more and more communication training into their curriculum. But even so, I felt there was a far cry from what we really need to know in terms of getting the most efficient communication with our patients. So that was one part. The other part is that I went vegan even before going to medical school, and I had this pressure on my shoulders. I felt, I have this responsibility. I mean, I'm in this institution with so many people who are going to have such an impact on the lives of so many people going forward, that I need to make sure that they get influenced in the way that veganism can be spread. I felt like I have a responsibility for the animals, etc., to have a positive impact on these people that I'm sharing this educational journey with. So I thought, I really need to make sure everybody gets a positive influence and start seeing veganism in the right way, and start incorporating more plant-based advice into their work. And I just noticed I had a few preconceived notions that didn't work too well. I had the preconceived notion of, okay, medical students were logical, intelligent human beings who are, once you present them the facts, they'll say, oh, okay, I guess I was wrong, let me change. The dream situation is so easy. You just show people the facts, and they change. And after half a year to a year of doing that with not a lot of success, but downright aggressive responses, and really hostile situations, and a lot of anger, a lot of passive aggressiveness, I started realizing slowly but surely, hey, maybe I'm missing something. Something's not working here. And that's when I started reading a lot of books on social psychology and communication skills. I mean, one of the first ones I ever read, which I still recommend. I know there's a ton of different ways of learning, and I'm sure you are aware of many others as well. But one of the first books I ever read was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And it's just a very pragmatic, very practical approach to start incorporating some of these principles into your communication. And it was almost like, night and day when I started incorporating these things and trying to talk in a different way, start trying to influence in a different way, all of a sudden I went from having almost this kind of band of people who were against the vegan message to just having people who were actually interested and curious and came to me and asked me questions and started being like, hey Leo, I've done vegan for a few weeks now and I feel great and all this kind of stuff. So it was a completely different story.
So
So once I started,
what actually changed, like, from your, if you can point out, or if you can pinpoint maybe one key thing that changed from your, what your conversations looked like before, and
yeah,
maybe what they look like now, what would you say that is?
I think the number one thing would probably be that I went from the kind of directive or the telling people what to do to asking people what they think of different things and allowing them to come to their own conclusions. Basically, it's instead of me pushing my views, it was kind of allowing them to realize my views on their own, if that makes sense. So that was probably the biggest change that happened. Yeah.
That, I mean, yes, it makes perfect sense to me. And AVO's like, the little slogan that I came up with for AVO, which is on the website, is stop debating and start inspiring. And I feel like we often, although we don't intend to go into debates, people are very familiar with that style of communication. When you disagree with someone, you want to use, I mean, especially as a doctor, right? You want to use your education, maybe the position that you have, people look at you as a doctor, so you have some, I don't know what the word is, maybe prestige or something like that, respect, clout. And so people be tempted to say, well, no, listen, I know best. I've done the research. Here's what it is. But yeah, a lot of people, we've heard it 100 times, or 1,000 times, people pushing back all the time with arguments that don't really make too much sense, or they're not very educated on the topic. So how would you suggest people do that? Like, how do you avoid getting into these debates and these arguments where people start making, they start saying things that really, they don't believe, right? When they start arguing for like plants being also living beings and we're murdering plants and stuff like that. Like we know that deep down they don't actually believe that a plant is the same as a dog. Like stepping on a lawn, on a piece of grass or something like that is not the same as stepping on a dog's tail. They're going to be very different reactions, right? How do you suggest that we avoid putting people in those situations where they start making these ridiculous arguments?
Yeah. It's a golden question. I think it's so funny when you say that. I've like some of the principles I follow is the exact same. One of the first things that you learn in that book was the best way to win an argument is to avoid an argument. But yeah, I think for me the approach is to, instead of coming from when you're talking about debates and stuff like that, that's the winning mindset. Like, I will win the debate, I will show the person I'm right. That's kind of how a lot of people think about these things. But for me, the only efficient way to go about it is actually to shift from the dynamic of winning and the dynamic of disproving and debunking and debating to shifting towards more the perspective of understanding. Because when you shift the dynamic towards understanding and trying to understand where the person is coming from, trying to understand how they're thinking, they will feel that. They will feel your empathy. They will feel your desire to actually see them for what they are and understand them for how they think. And they will reciprocate. They will try to understand your point of view. So it's really understanding the human psychology that comes behind people's opinions and their identity mindsets, all these types of things. Because again, as you say, a lot of this stuff is not rational. It's all emotional. A lot of people don't believe even in the arguments that they're making, but it's just wall after wall after wall after wall. And if you take everything verbatim, if you take everything just based on what they're saying, you're going to go crazy. You're going to think, oh, but every time I disprove of something he or she says, they just come with another argument. And then you take that one and then they come with another, there's endless arguments, because you're not going to the root cause. The root cause isn't actually the argument. The argument is a smokescreen for some emotional thing that is going on behind. And until you address that, the arguments will never get you anywhere. It's just going to be an unending battle. So I think coming to an understanding, and allow people to feel heard, allow people to feel understood. And then coming again from the non-directive and more inquisitive, curious, let's kind of, shift the frame from me versus you to we. Like, let's come, one of my favorite phrases from the book when it comes to pointing out people's mistakes goes something like, hey, listen, I've made a ton of mistakes in the past, and I'm going to make a lot of mistakes in the future. And if I'm wrong now, then I want us to figure out what's actually going on, because I want to know what the truth is. So let's get to the bottom of this. What do you think? And then you go on, and it's kind of just setting the frame. Look, I've been wrong many times. I don't really care about being wrong. I just want to get to the truth. And that allows people to take down their defenses, because they're like, oh, this guy doesn't care about being wrong. Why should I care about being wrong? It's like, it's not a big problem,
That is such a good point, man. And I just want to I want to echo what you're saying and kind of drill down a little bit more. Like, a lot of times I think we lose sight. By we, I mean vegans and animal rights activists, when we're having these conversations. I mean, especially when we're having them with family and friends. I think it's the most challenging conversations that we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I love what you said there. I love how you said that a lot of these arguments that people throw out against veganism, and you knock one down and another one comes and another one comes. Mm-hmm. A lot of people get so frustrated. And that's what I see in training vegans and activists for a few years now. I see the frustration that people have. And I think that if we realized exactly what you just said, and I never really thought of it exactly like that, but that there's smoke screens and these are the symptoms, and there's a root cause to that. And when you focus on what that root cause is in the conversation, as opposed to trying to knock down the endless amount of arguments that come, against veganism, the conversations go so differently, very, very differently, which again, you probably noticed. And then you said, something like, I might be wrong right now, right? And just acknowledging that, showing this person that your ego is not. There's an expression that says it's like the ego in one that recognizes the ego in another, or something like that. I always screw up quotes, but something like that. But
the essence is still there.
The essence, yeah, you understand it. It's like when you get rid of your ego and you show the other person that your ego is not present, it allows them to be more vulnerable and to be, to be more open and maybe to be wrong. And I think that that's what's potentially lacking a lot of times, because we're right. Let's be honest. We believe that we're right. Could we be wrong? Sure. But, we've done each person that's probably watching this has done so much research and seen so much more than your average person, that chances are, if I had to bet, I would bet that, you can be healthy on a plant-based diet, and so, yeah, it's funny how just getting rid of the ego. Actually, here's another question for you. What do you think is, so we've kind of focused a little bit on, what might help communication, but what do you think hinders it? What do you think is maybe one of the biggest impediments to effective communication between anybody? It doesn't have to be about veganism, just people communicating and actually understanding each other well. Maybe even an example, it was like that conversation with you and Richard, right? It wasn't, you guys weren't connecting, right? Hearing each other and that sort of thing. Maybe you were a little bit more. And by the way, I just want to make it clear, I'm not bashing Richard. I love his channel. I watch probably most of his videos. And there is something to be said about his style, which we can even talk about a little bit later. But what do you think is the biggest impediment to communication?
Well, I think the ego that you touched on is probably by far one of the most important things. I think, again, not to bash on Richard, I think the focus on that debate for him was perhaps a little bit more under the, trying to win, right? It's like winning the debate. I have to prove this person to be wrong. I have to put my point across strongly. Whereas at least what I was trying to do is I was trying to focus more on, understanding how he thinks and allowing my points of view to be understood in the same way. So I was trying to come from the understanding mindset. I think I even said in the debate, look, I don't care about winning this debate. I just want us to really see each other's points of views for what it is. But I felt like it was a little bit difficult to get that connection. And, the next day when I went and I saw the post debate kind of stream where he was talking about what I said, he just it was very, very clear that he completely misunderstood a lot of the things that I said.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think absolutely the ego and the need to be right, I think is one of the most harmful things that can come in really trying to influence people. And so even in psychology as well, I mean, that's it's a cognitive distortion actually. And this cognitive distortion is something I recommend everybody read into. These are principles in psychology that talk about subconscious belief systems or subconscious ways of thinking that don't align with reality. So things like black and white thinking, things like the fair, the world is fair kind of distortion, or that always be right is another one. There's so many different cognitive distortions where we believe the world to be a certain way subconsciously, emotionally, not logically. Everybody knows if you think logically, okay, is everything black or white? Is everything ones or zeros? You'll say no. There's a lot of nuance in the world, right? But a lot of people, when actually thinking about different issues, will just tend to gravitate into that subconscious mindset. Human beings, again, are emotional animals. We are, for the most part, making decisions on an automatic basis. We have a subconscious programming that really allows us to function in everyday life without having to logically think about every single thing we're doing, right? And this includes all the most rational, all the most logical, the most brilliant scientific people you can think of. They're still irrational animals for a big part of their lives. They're still emotional and subconscious animals for the majority, or for the most part, unless they're, there's always exceptions to every rule. There's some, people who have alexithymia, for example, which is where you have, no emotional expressivity whatsoever. But for the vast majority of people, emotional and subconscious patterns of thinking are going to be ruling their way of living. And so this is one of the things, again, that frustrated me so much in medical school, right? It's like, oh, everybody's going to just be, but no, doctors are human beings just the same as everyone else. And they're just as emotional as everyone else. They have just as many subconscious, and subconscious beliefs and cognitive biases and all of these things that stop them from just seeing facts for facts and just logically thinking about everything, right? So it's really, you have to, number one, have an understanding for how people work, and understand and acknowledge that what people say isn't always what's the matter, and what people say isn't always, the truth. It's like we talked about before, smoke screens. There's something underneath that you have to address. It's not always about addressing what people are saying. And then the second thing I think is also around this, the ego and the emotional stuff. If you ignore that, you're never going to get anywhere, because all the walls are going to come up, and it's just a huge deterrent to actually understanding each other and coming to the same page. So it's not about winning, it's about understanding.
And I love how you mentioned the fact that, like, so many of us, especially when our egos get involved, like when our egos get triggered, we go into this very black and white thinking, and I'll admit I'm biased in a way. When I was listening to your conversation with Richard, of course, I mean, I had, 20 years of my life was spent kind of learning how to communicate and teaching people to do that. And yes, my knowledge aligns more with the position you were taking in that conversation. But my ego was not really involved because I wasn't in the conversation. So I was listening to Richard's points pretty objectively, I think. And I maybe want to challenge you here, because I don't want to make it sound like, this conversation here is like bashing people who don't communicate a certain way. Richard, for example, for anyone who doesn't know who Richard is, Vegan Gains, over 300,000 subscribers, I think. Like he's got a really big channel, and he's impacted a lot of people, and he's influenced a lot of people and inspired a lot of people to be vegan. So my question to you is, given that Richard is probably one of the more, I don't know how to describe it, like aggressive, straightforward, blunt, like does not, as far as I can see, does not really implement a lot of the coaching and kind of these techniques that we're talking about. How is it that he is so successful at what he's doing?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can give you my opinion, and 100%, I don't think, people who aren't communicating the most efficiently are in any way worse or worse vegans or anything like that. I think, again, like in my debate with Richard, we're all on the same team. What I want is to save the most amount of animals and to make this movement grow the most. And so I just want the best for all of us, right? We're all on the same team. But my theory, if you will, I mean, this is stuff you can't really measure. You can't do a, like a retrospective cohort study of Richard's channel and his impact on the world. Like that would be interesting, but it's nothing we can objectively look at too much detail. But what I would say my theory is probably, as you say, there's so many frustrations when it comes to people having all of these conversations go south, having so many of these unsuccessful conversations. There's a lot of anger that comes up, and there's a lot of people just not really understanding. There's these conflicts, and people don't understand, why are people being so aggressive when I'm just trying to help the world. I'm trying to save animals. I'm just sticking to the science, sticking to the facts. And yet, people who I cared about, friends, family, these people are just reacting so poorly. They're, angry and sometimes extremely rude. And it's upsetting, and I think what having someone who is very strong and just stands very firmly and just says it how it is gives a lot of power, and a lot of, it speaks a lot of these voices that are being held inside by people who are being repressed by their environments, people who are being antagonized at every side. It gives them that release of all of those frustrations, and it really feels good for a lot of those people. So I think, for the most part, again, this is my theory, and I may be wrong, as I said before, I may be wrong. And if I am, then, hopefully we can move towards a different direction if that's better. But I think for the most part, the people who, are following Richard are not the people who aren't very aware of veganism from before, or the people who are, considering slowly veganism. Most of these people are people who are either very, very open-minded from the beginning, because I know there are a lot of people who have gone vegan because of Richard. But I think that requires a special type of open-mindedness, where you allow someone that forceful to, get to you, right? Because most people, if someone with a completely different opinion to you comes very hard, most people are going to react very, very poorly. But the thing is, when you have a reach like Richard, even if it isn't the most efficient way of doing it, you will get a ton of people coming towards that direction just because of the mass, the huge amount of numbers that you're reaching. So my theory is that most of the people are either already interested in vegan, or already vegan themselves, or be extremely open-minded to the point where they allow even harsh and even, sometimes siding on the rude side of things, but extremely strong, extremely, unapologetic, very, very straight to the point kind of criticism, like right in your face. And they're open-minded enough to allow that to actually affect them and influence them, and look at things rationally instead of letting their egos get involved. Whereas I think the majority of the other people who I've been experiencing and even showing some of Richard's stuff in the past, or people who have, even some people, when I say vegan, they say, yeah, I've heard of this Vegan Gains guy and stuff like that. So, a lot of people know about him who aren't vegan. And from my experience, and again, this might be wrong, it's just my experience as a scientist, I would much rather rely my opinions on studies and empirical information and data. But from my experience, most of the people who I've met who aren't vegan, who I've heard of Vegan Gains' channel, think he is like a really obnoxious, or from their words, even like a terrible person. It's like horrible, and it's so extreme, and it's, that puts them off veganism so much, and they're just like, they'll start telling me they're like how horrible he is and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't agree. Like, I actually think Richard is a really cool guy, and is a really good guy, and he's done a ton of good stuff. But this is kind of the feedback that I'm getting from people who aren't already in this movement, is that like a lot of them just have really, really super, super negative reactions to him. And that's also reflected in my own way of activism, and my own way of trying to influence people back in the day when I didn't have these communication skills, is that I would also get these really aggressive, really, really angry responses. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm curious as to what you think about that, because again, this is just my experience, and it's a kind of an anecdotal example. And like I said, I would much rather get more high quality data. But from what I've read as well in social psychology and communication, it seems like this, if you're trying to reach as many people as possible, this communicative approach is definitely more efficient for influencing change. But there are definitely people like Gary Yourofsky and Vegan Gains who have very strong messages, and maybe Gary Yourofsky is not as the same. They're two different people, but the
I
very
mean,
strong
Gary's
approach.
quite, yeah, they're different, but I would kind of put them on the same side of
Mhm,
the communication spectrum. They're just like blunt, straightforward, direct.
mhm,
And and I asked this question because I've thought about this a lot too. I've given this a lot of thought, and I mean, I train what I train because I believe it's the most effective. But at the same
mhm,
time, I understand that things aren't black and white, and I think that everything is contextual. And I'll tell
mhm,
you why I think that Gary Yourofsky has been so successful, because I think he has been tremendously successful. He impacted me
mhm,
quite strongly when I first went vegan and when I found his speech.
mhm,
And I'll tell you why I think Richard has the potential to also, I'll bet you he is quite influential for a lot of people.
mhm,
Um, and why he also he's very polarizing. I think both of them are very polarizing. And
mhm,
I think that there is something to be said for being polarizing. I mean, look, I don't think his channel is what it is and his reach is what it is if he weren't so polarizing. If he were more polite and
yeah, yeah,
whatever, he wouldn't get that. He wouldn't get those
mhm,
views. So it's like this double-edged sword. It's like, to get that, you have to be
mhm,
controversial. But if you're
yeah,
controversial, then you're gonna have people who hate you. Okay, so that's one thing. But I think that as I've like studied Richard's communication and his channel and Gary Yourofsky as well, I've started thinking, I'm like, well, what are they doing well? Like, what things are they doing well? And I don't know if Richard is necessarily conscious of this. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But I think that Richard still, despite his very kind of direct and I'd say almost aggressive, because he insults people. He calls them, friggin' morons
I
and
have
idiots
to
and stuff like
say,
that.
less and less over the years. It's gone a little bit
Yeah.
in a upward direction for sure.
Yeah. And so maybe it's a subconscious thing, but I think that Richard still does a good job of building rapport with his audience.
Mhm,
And yes, he's a character. The way he communicates is very blunt, but you kind of know that you're going to expect that, and it's entertainment. Like, whether you agree with it
mhm,
or not, I guarantee you there are people that watch Richard's channel regularly, even though they disagree with veganism,
mhm,
because he is entertaining and he elicits some sort of emotional reaction that people go back for. But
yeah,
on a more positive note, like the little sketches that he does where he dresses up and he does these
mhm,
like silly little
mhm,
things, that helps people, that helps him appear, even though he's very serious and very direct, as being less. He doesn't take himself so seriously, right? When he
yeah,
when he
yeah,
does these jokes and that sort of stuff. And
yeah.
I think that there's something in that. And Gary Yourofsky, I think, is a great example. Like a buddy of mine. Do you know who Ryuji is? Peace by Vegan.
Uh, no, not sure.
You would
Not
love
aware.
him. First of all, I
Okay,
think he is another awesome communicator. We have a video on the AVO channel, a conversation about communication as well. And this guy
okay,
is, man, he's
awesome.
bright. He I think he gets it. And his channel is fantastic. For anyone that's looking for other channels to inspire you on how to communicate, I actually learned from him, and he's awesome. So his
Mm,
name's Ryuji. His
yeah,
channel, I
yeah.
think, on Instagram and on YouTube is Peace by Vegan. And where was I going with this? I don't remember, but I was going to talk about Gary Yourofsky, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I mean, I'm
actually,
definitely going to
let
be
me
checking out his social media. Sounds like a really good good source of information
yeah, he's
for
he's
sure.
a lot bigger on Instagram. It's too bad that his YouTube channel hasn't taken off,
Hmm.
but he's quite big on Instagram. And it should take off. So if you guys aren't subscribed to Ryuji's channel on YouTube, you should. His content's fantastic, and he posts
Awesome.
regularly. Like, I'm really bad with posting. He posts all the
Mm,
time, and I don't think I've ever seen much from him that I disagree with, that I don't think is really valuable. So,
nice.
but going to Gary Yourofsky and actually going to a larger conversation, Gary and Richard are examples, but I think there's
Hmm.
been a conversation that I've seen in the animal rights movement happening lately that's divided people, and it's the kind of like more aggressive blaming and shaming type of like
Hmm.
conversational strategy
Hmm.
versus the the softer one, let's say, the more kind of coaching, Socratic type of method, you know? And a lot of people who defend the more kind of whatever aggressive style, for a lack of a better word, point to Gary Yourofsky and say, like, look at Gary, like, look how aggressive he is, how direct he is, how blunt he is, and look how many people he's inspired, right? And I don't disagree with that. I think Gary has inspired a lot of people. But what I think a lot of people who make that comparison neglect, when you watch Gary's speech, like if you watch the best speech.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's very good. It is the best speech.
It's fantastic. It's so well done. But what a lot of people forget, and what they miss out on if they're not really looking for it, is all the opportunities that Gary takes to actually build rapport with his audience. So what he does really well, and what allows him to speak so directly and so maybe forcefully, if you want to call it that, is that he does a really good job of connecting with his audience at the beginning. First of all, he is a fantastic speaker, like super charismatic, really engaging, like so confident. So when you listen to, I remember when I watched that speech, I was just like, my ego was not present. And I was just, I felt like I was being almost kind of like, not scolded, but like talked to by my dad. I felt like my dad was like, dude, you gotta wake up. You gotta listen to this. And the way that he did that, at the beginning, he says like, I'm not here to be your enemy. You know, I'm not here to like, you know, attack you or anything like that. And he's basically, I'm just here to share like information. I'm just here to share shit that like people are trying to hide from us. Or I don't exactly know, but he comes out and he says that at the beginning, and he says like, and he makes a lot of jokes. He makes the audience laugh a lot. You know, and that helps that helps to bring people's defensiveness down. And so I think when you're trying to be this direct with people, and I don't think that people should stop being direct. I think being direct, even like with my style, it's more the questions that I ask. I'll ask very direct questions, and I'll challenge people.
Absolutely,
and I won't let them divert the conversation. I won't let them not answer a question. Like if they skip over a question and they don't answer it, I'll go right back to it. You know, I won't let them get past it. But I think what a lot of people miss out on is the connection that you generate with a person. You can do that in so many different ways, but create that connection. And I feel like a lot of people almost criticize that aspect of communication, and they you know, I've heard people call it like pandering, like you're pandering to people when you try to be nice to them. Yeah, we try to be nice to them. We try to understand them, you know. And I mean, from what I know, that is just literally the core of good, effective, inspiring communication, is generating a connection with that person so they trust you. Not for you to win this debate, right? It's not about winning this. It's so that they can open up and explore a really sensitive, really difficult topic. Where at the end of the day, like, what are we trying to get? At the end of the day, if we're having an animal rights conversation, we're trying to get to a point where this other person admits that they have been doing something wrong their entire life. Like, that's a big thing for someone to be like, I've been, and when they get to that point, they now have to either stop doing it, which sucks, right? For that non-vegan, if they get to that point, then they have to say, okay, well, shit. Okay, now I have to go vegan, and that sucks because I don't want to be vegan. Or they have to decide to continue living the way they're living. But if they've come to the conclusion that it's wrong, now they're living against their values, and that's a problem for people as well. So I think it's like, and going back to Gary and more kind of direct communication, I think that like, because they do such a good job of lowering people's defenses. Oh, and another thing, by the way, most of the people that watch Vegan Gains, that watch Gary Yourofsky, watch them on a computer screen, right? Where they're not facing this person, right? And so your ego is much more removed when you're watching a video versus having a conversation in person. And I think a lot of people have mistakenly taken that approach and said, you know what, because it works for Gary Yourofsky's videos, I can go and talk to someone face to face in the same way. Like this, Yeah, and it's even different. Gary doesn't talk face to face to people. He talks to an audience of people. It's not really a dialogue, it's a monologue, right?
Yeah, and I
So
think that's so important, because like what you're saying, I love how we're talking about the black and white and the nuance, because everything you're saying, from the different ways of building rapport, right? There's so many different ways of doing that, the different ways of communicating the message, the different platforms, whether you're talking to someone face to face, or if you're doing a speech, or if you're doing videos. All of these are different nuances that come into it. And this is one of the, again, the problems with human beings. And when it comes to the psychology, is a lot of times we try to oversimplify things, like this is the right way, this is the wrong way, the apologetic, the non-apologetic, the aggressive versus the soft spoken. Like, it's not about being one or the other, and it's not about one being right for all platforms and one being less efficient. There might be like I've always said, when it comes to being aggressive and polarizing and getting attention, there is a place for that, right? There is a place, and it does so much good for the movement, and getting in the media, getting on newspapers, getting on TV, YouTube videos, all this kind of stuff. You really need to have something a bit more provocative, a bit more emotionally engaging, a bit more polarizing. And then you have the debating or discussion or face-to-face activism, where maybe there's a whole different set of rules again. So it's really about understanding and realizing and making that connection to the point that not every situation is the same. And so not every situation requires the same type of communication, or the same type of, building rapport, the same type of aggressive or non-aggressive message. Really, you want to tailor it not just to the person you're talking about or talking to, but also tailor your communication style to the situation you're in. So I think that is absolutely key. And again, I love how now we're because I haven't really thought about it this way either, because black and white, I usually think about in terms of belief systems and stuff like that. But even in terms of communication, there's a lot of nuance in that way. And I think bringing that nuance into our awareness and being aware that, hey, it's okay to be more aggressive in certain areas, and it's okay to be more, quote unquote, apologetic or soft spoken or more understanding in other ways, and that there are different ways of building rapport, all this kind of stuff, and different personalities. Maybe you as a person can build rapport better with jokes. Maybe you as a person can build rapport better with relating to someone and understanding someone, or bringing their egos down some other way. There's so much that goes into it. So I think we need to stop trying to oversimplify things by saying, okay, this is the right way, everybody do this is the wrong way. Just scratch that out and understand there's a lot of nuance in everything in life, and communication is no exception to that.
I think nuance, and if I were to say, like, what's one thing, and I'll ask you the same question, I'm going to answer it. Let me ask you first. What do you think is, let's suppose somebody wants to be the most effective communicator they can be, right? So they're like, okay, I want to speak up for the animals, right? I want to represent them, and I want to do that in the most effective way possible, in as many scenarios as possible. Like, whether I'm giving a speech at a school, or I'm talking to my parents, or I'm talking to someone on the street, including people that are going to come at you more aggressively, people that are going to be more open to the message. What's kind of one piece of advice that you would give people if they wanted to be the most effective communicator they could be?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, the gold question, the most important thing you can think of. I think, yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I can do this question justice, because it's such a big question, but I would say it would be something along the lines of really taking the focus in the conversation off of yourself, and having the focus on who is receiving your message, because that allows for that nuance as well. That allows for the different strategies that work better for different platforms. But really, the focus, the presence of your mind should be at who are you talking to, what are you trying to get across, and how are they it's the empathy. It's about being empathetic, not just to empathy is such a big thing in veganism, but about being empathetic to animals and to our environment, all this kind of thing. But in communication, I think being empathetic to the person you're talking to, in other words, understanding the person or people you're talking to, and trying to tailor your message to them. So your focus should not be, and this is kind of one of the things that's difficult when communicating. It takes experience, it takes confidence, it takes all these things to shift the focus completely away from yourself. You're not thinking about, am I saying the right things? Am I looking good in front of the audience? And am I saying and like and stumbling, or You know, am I doing, you know, the focus is completely off of yourself. The focus is on your audience, 100%. And you're just trying your very, very best, whatever way, whatever strategy, whatever approach you're taking, you're trying your very, very hardest to connect with them. And that's what builds rapport, right? Is really making that connection and making sure you're really trying your best to understand and connect with them on a deeper level than the superficial me versus you. Oh, am I right? Am I saying the right things? Am I speaking loud enough? Is my tone confident? Whatever. Like, no, it's really trying to connect with the people you're talking about and having them as your main focus, because we're terrible at multitasking. If you're thinking about a lot of different things at the same time, it's going to be terrible. I mean, whenever I do coaching as well, I always talk about doing 1, 2, max maybe 3 things that we're focusing on over a given period of time. Because if you give someone 10 or 20 goals, you're just going to screw everything up. So it's really focusing on a few very good, you know, a few things that are important until those become automatic, until those become new habits that you do without even thinking. And then you start adding new things little by little until you've changed perhaps your communication style or your style of activism, whatever it is. But when you're doing the activism itself, the number one focus has to be your audience, 100%.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge you. You said, I agree with you. When you hit someone with too many things, too many goals, even I think in outreach conversations, too many pieces of information. Like a lot of times we think that if we hit them with like as much knowledge as we can, then that's going to get them to go vegan. But most people like in one ear, out the other one. So what would you say is the core part to any conversation? Like, obviously you might end up on some tangents, but what would you say is the core part to any conversation about veganism and animal rights?
Okay, core part of the conversation with veganism and animal rights, I guess, would be, well, it would be, I guess, the topic at hand, right? You know, talking about the different viewpoints around animals and how we treat them and stuff like that. But I mean, yeah, it depends. If your main focus is influencing people, then your main focus should be, you know, how people behave and how people feel and how people think about these things, right? It's if you're just talking facts, okay, 80 billion animals, land animals die per year, you know, so many trillions die. If you're talking land animals and, you know, the tons of CO2 and methane emissions, and you start just talking facts and facts and facts, yeah, sure, that's important information. And that might be why we're doing this. That might be why we're trying to influence people. But the core issue at hand that has to be addressed if you're trying to change people's behaviors is actually their emotions, their feelings, their thoughts, their beliefs. That's really what's under focus. And until you are able to, in a you know, a relatable and a understanding and a connecting way, address those beliefs and challenge those beliefs in a way that allows people to really think about them without the ego, without the defenses, then, you know, those facts and figures aren't going to count for anything, right? So
can I actually say something about figures? I think a lot of us know those figures, and I used to drop them into conversations until I started again thinking from a, you know, psychology standpoint, like what effect does dropping these really big numbers have on people? And tell me what you think about this. I don't know if I'm right, but I've changed the way that I address this. And I stopped. I thought it was really powerful, you know? I mean, it's impressive when you talk about 80 billion land animals and, you know, 2 to 3 trillion marine animals. Like, these numbers are massive. So it's shocking, right?
Yeah.
But what I realized is that I think that by me dropping these massive numbers, it may have actually been counterproductive to the conversation for 2 reasons. One, because the problem is so large, as soon as you drop these numbers, the problem now becomes massive, like trillions. Well, what can I do as an individual now, right? So it kind of makes this problem look so massive, and well, what's one person going to do about that? But the second one, I think more important than that, is that we as humans do not have the ability to connect with more than a handful of people. Like, we can't even maintain more than a handful of like proper relationships in our lives. It's really difficult to connect with individuals, to connect with groups of people, right? Which is why when, you know, there's an infomercial, I don't know, an infomercial, but like a commercial on TV that's trying to get you to donate for animals or for to help reduce poverty or something. They don't talk about
the story of
statistics.
the one, yeah.
They talk about the story of one. So what I try to do in conversations now is I forget about the statistics, right? And I focus on an individual animal story. Maybe if we're watching a video, I'll draw attention to that individual and talk about that individual, or ask them questions about that individual, and how they feel about that, and how they think that individual feels. And yeah, I really try not to drop numbers anymore, because I find that it might not be serving the end goal of my conversation. What do you think about that?
Well, 100%, man. I think, it definitely takes a degree of understanding and skill in this area to even reflect and realize this. But I think you're 100% on the ball. And again, it might be different if you are doing, a documentary or something, or if you're doing a different platform again than face-to-face speaking. Perhaps there is a role for big, shocking, very impressive numbers. The other thing, when you're talking about face-to-face, the other thing I would say is, a lot of times people feel like if you come with a lot of information that they can't relate to, they almost feel looked down upon, right? If it's like an expert talking down to someone who is less knowledgeable or less intelligent or stuff like that. So people actually can also feel negatively in that regard too. So there's quite a few things that can happen, I think, psychologically when you're dropping these big numbers. But again, I think it depends on the situation, but 100%, I think if you're talking to people. And again, this is where it gets so mixed up, gets so confusing for people, because in science, in the medical field, with anecdotal evidence is like very bottom. It's like, don't even think about anecdotal evidence. It's like, it doesn't work. Yet when I'm a medical student going through, when I was a medical student going through medical school, I would see how important, even for doctors, anecdotal evidence is. I would see my own example of, back in the day when I was a bit skinnier, I was always sporty, but, I was starting to focus more on lifting weights. I could see the anecdotal evidence going from, okay, doctors ask me, oh, you're vegan, where do you get your protein? To a few years later, I've bulked up a bit. And then as soon as they hear I'm vegan, they're like, oh, well, you clearly don't have any trouble with protein. Yeah, okay, cool. And then they start asking me completely different questions. So even scientists, even doctors, they care about that example. They care about seeing the anecdotal evidence, seeing with their own eyes before they believe it, even though from the scientific point of view, that's completely nonsense. You don't want to believe in anecdotes over science. But again, doctors and scientists are human beings before they're this logical, rational, conscious, superhuman thing. That's not how it works. So we have to really remember that. And that's why I'm always talking about, we need to join the forces. Like science and marketing have to really join forces, because the way I see the situation in the world now is that we have the people who actually dedicate their careers. They dedicate 30 years of their lives to becoming the biggest experts in the world in certain fields. They've done so much research. They've, worked so hard in a certain field, and they're at the very back just screaming these facts, and nobody listens. And then you might have a teenager on social media just trying this trend out, and then it goes viral, and then they'll have, what they're talking about with zero credibility has a much, much larger impact than this person who's dedicated their entire lives to this field, right? So this is the problem today. We need to combine, the knowledge of science and facts and research with the marketing, the human psychology, the communication. These are the two things that need to combine so that we can actually bring this message across in the most effective way possible. And it's not an easy thing. It's a lot of complexities and a lot of different nuances depending on what kind of situations you're communicating with, but it's a learning process, and it's so much fun. It's one of the most fun learning processes you can do when you're going through and you're learning and you're seeing your own interactions going better and better and better. It motivates the crap out of you to get even better. So I would say, if anyone who actually wants to have an impact, learning about human psychology, learning about communication, even learning a little bit about marketing and sales and that kind of thing, the emotional animal that is a human being can be extremely, extremely powerful for spreading this message as efficiently as possible. 100%.
I do want to say, for anyone who's watching and does not have, you recommended kind of marketing and sales background. That is my background. I want to make it really clear, because when I start, usually when I start my trainings, and we're right at the beginning of day one, and people know that I come from a sales background, they're kind of expecting some sort of me to teach them how to manipulate people and how to to mess with their minds and stuff like that. And the thing is, yes, there are ways to do that. There are kind of what's called, why is my mind blank right now? Oh my goodness, high pressure, like high pressure sales, right? Where somebody comes to your door to door sales, and they will use psychological manipulation to get you to do something, which you might regret later. But when you actually work in corporate sales and you're working with, big, massive companies that are multi-billion-dollar companies, you're not going to pressure someone into buying something. Like, they're too smart for it. And even if you manage to trick somebody into buying something, and they realize it doesn't work or doesn't meet the solution that it should have, you'll never renew that contract. And you want a long, you want multiple renewals if you want to make lots of money in sales. Otherwise, your reputation suffers. Anyway, long story short is, this stuff, these communication skills that you're talking about, Leo, are things that, from what I know, they open up conversation. They create true dialogues, as opposed to these like dual monologues where people are speaking at each other, not with each other. So I don't want people hearing this to kind of think, you know what, that's kind of bullshit. I don't want to like manipulate people. I just want to be real, right? I think this actually allows us to be more real and to communicate more authentically, vulnerably, genuinely, and have a real conversation. So I'm not going to, talk any more about that, because obviously we could go into details about it. But if anyone's interested in learning that stuff, the book that you mentioned, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, is a great book. There, obviously, I would be silly if I didn't mention the AVO webinars. What I've put together are basically trainings from all of my professional experience, and how I apply that to veganism and animal rights activism. So you can check out the AVO YouTube channel. The website's amazingveganoutreach.com, and there's an online learning section where you can see their free trainings. By the way, and Leo, I'm gonna ask you if you want to plug anything, if you want to share anything of yours as well. I'm just gonna finish plugging what I do, and then I'll share. I'll kind of give the floor to you to wrap up.
Awesome, thanks. Let me manipulate people into buying my stuff.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. So coming from a sales background, I felt very awkward. Like, I work full time in animal rights. This is what I do for a living now. But I felt very awkward, like having to sell what I know to people who are working for animals. Like, it just felt really just not cool and very awkward. But luckily I came across something called the gift economy, which I think is beautiful. And it's what I have worked on for the last few years now. And it basically, all the work that I do goes out into the community as a gift for the people that are trying to help animals. And anyone who is able to and wants to support the work that AVO does is welcome to provide a financial gift, to support it, so that I can continue doing that work. So that's how it works. Nobody's ever charged anything up front for any of the trainings that I do, even if I have to travel halfway across the world to do a training. It's just up to people's ability and their desire to want to support it. So check out those webinars on the AVO site. If they're useful and you want to support it and you want other people to see them, feel free to support. And if they're not useful, that's fine too. Actually, sorry, I want to say one more thing, because I want to answer the question that I asked you. In my opinion, one of the greatest things that we can do to become really effective communicators is not necessarily listen to what I have to say or what Leo has to say. It's do research. And after you do research and after you learn different things, so let's suppose you go onto AVO's site, you watch the trainings, there's 4 of them on there, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go and practice this and I'm going to implement it. The best thing that you can do is to test whatever it is that you're trying. So create a strategy. If your strategy is, I'm going to be more direct, more blunt, I'm just going to tell people how it is, go and see how people react and try that for 100 conversations. Then switch it, try something different, try that for 100 conversations, and see how people react to you. And my version of animal rights activism, of street outreach, of everything that I do is constantly being tested and changed to what I see kind of leads to the higher number of percentages of people taking the topic seriously, wanting to go and research it, wanting to go vegan. So just learn and test what it is that you're trying out and see how people react. So Leo, awesome. Thanks again for joining me. And one, where can people find you? What are you working on right now? Kind of what are you working on for veganism and animal rights right now?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, the whole reason I'm on social media and I started even doing YouTube in the first place was to kind of promote the lifestyle, right? Promote veganism and spread the word. So right now, recently, actually, a few kind of exciting things have been happening. You know, I've gotten in contact with some people who are helping me with making the content more, quickly. I have an editor on board, so that's going to help things go a lot faster. Because for me, always the trouble was editing. I've never been the fastest computer person, so it's always been a struggle for me. So that's on point where also we're partnering up with a website called Plant-Based Data, which is an awesome website ran by Dr. Tushar Mehta from Canada. He's been with
I know
the
Tushar.
Chief.
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's great. He's great, and he's
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 actually an
basically
AVO supporter. He
awesome.
yeah, supports AVO in the gift economy. So
Good stuff. Yeah, I mean,
that's
he
awesome.
knows his stuff, and he's he's a super passionate vegan, but he's also super good with such a brilliant mind. He's very scientific. He's compiling basically a ton of really good evidence, almost making type of a almost a little bit of a different type of version of nutrition facts, but with more of a focus on environmentalism. And we're also doing a lot of work in pandemics and zoonoses, which are infections where a pathogen comes from an animal to a human being, which we're seeing a huge increase in now, and obviously it's very topical now with the whole COVID-19 outbreak and all of that kind of stuff. And well, basically they're building a team to get this evidence-based approach when it comes to environmentalism and some other issues around veganism as well. So great website if anybody wants to check it out, plantbasedata.org. I think it's .org. It's actually a pretty new website. I'm not sure if it's .com or .org. I think it's .org, but here we can test. And then apart from that, I do coaching. So I have also a Canadian actually in Vancouver, so the other side of Canada, who's he's the vegan trainer at Instagram. He's been a coach for over 10 years, been vegan over 10 years. Amazing guy, great communicator as well. If you ever want to have another guest, and he basically has partnered up with me, and we're coaching people when it comes to lifestyle, when it comes to health, when it comes to fitness. And again, we think living by example is one of the most important things in order to spread veganism. So being a fit and healthy example of a really up and coming functional human being, but also in order for your own life satisfaction, your quality of life, really being able to live your own life to the fullest, is health is going to be extremely important. So we do a lot of work there where we're taking the evidence-based factors that have been shown to improve people's health. So nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management, mental, social well-being, all that kind of stuff. And we do a coaching program there. So there's both one-on-one coaching, there's group coaching, there's basically meal and workout plans if you're looking just for a plan that you can follow. So there's stuff like that we're doing together with him.
Where can people find that?
Yeah, so basically you can find everything on either my YouTube videos or on my Instagram. I have it actually linked on my profile on Instagram we have a free masterclass as well, where you get taught a lot of the basic coaching stuff that we use for our clients. But yeah, in order to find me, Instagram, YouTube, just Dr. Leo Venus. I try to reply to as many of my DMs as possible, but it's starting to become very difficult now. So I think if you really want to get a hold of me, my email is linked to my Instagram, and that's by far going to be the most safe way to make sure I actually see your message, because yeah, I've definitely fallen behind on the DMs for a while now, so it's kind of hard to keep up with all of those. But yeah, YouTube, Instagram, Dr. Leo Venus. I also have a Facebook page, but it's kind of a small side project. And then yeah, we do the coaching, we do the plant-based data, and of course always trying to spread veganism in all of these social media platforms. So that's basically what I'm all about. I've decided to go a little bit of a different untraditional route there. All my friends and colleagues and even some people in the family are like, what are you doing? You're a doctor. You like go to work at a hospital, don't go with social media. Are you crazy? So, but this is my passion. This is what I live for. And so I'm just super thankful that I get to actually be able to live off of and do this, full time, and not have to kind of compromise or veer my focus into different directions when this is really what I want to be working on. So I'm just super thankful I have that opportunity.
I have to ask you this question because I'm wondering it, and maybe other people are wondering it as well. First of all, super cool, obviously, that you are a doctor and that you support, obviously veganism, plant-based. I think it's nice to
Hmm.
have that. More professionals that have studied it and researched it,
Hmm.
it just lends more credibility to the movement. But if you had to recommend one website where, let's suppose that, you're talking to someone, you manage to get them to connect with animals and to
Hmm.
understand, that it's wrong. You manage to generate some level of accountability where they feel like they need to do something now, but they're
Hmm.
not sure about the health aspects, or they're very analytical and they want to
Hmm.
go and do some research and look at stuff. Is there one website that you'd recommend people go to, that you would go to, or that other people should go to
Hmm.
like really do as much research as they could?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When it comes to if you're very analytical or very research oriented, I would just say Nutrition Facts is the place to go, just because of the sheer quantity. They have the whole team. I don't even know how many thousands of papers they're pumping through now, but it's by far the biggest research or database or compilation of actual evidence that has to do with health and diet, and even some
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle stuff outside of diet. So, for anyone who is, it's basically the gold standard of being evidence-based, right? You never see them talking about their opinion or their experience, but you're seeing them always talking about the research, always about what evidence is there in this, when it comes to this topic, this question, what is the research saying? What is the evidence? What is the data? And so for anyone who is really analytical and really wants to see the research, I think nutritionfacts.org would be 100% the first place I would send them.
Yeah, but Leo, obviously that website is going to be biased. Obviously it's going to be biased towards veganism. But what do you say if someone says that to you? What do you say?
Oh man, what would I say? Well, I would say number one, what is, I would ask again. I'm not telling people my opinion. I would say, okay, interesting, interesting. So you're saying it's biased. Okay, so tell me, why do you think it's biased? Or what is even the definition of bias? What is bias for you? What do you mean when you say bias, right? And slowly but
Well, they're
surely
gonna
we
they're
go
gonna
through.
cherry pick. They're gonna cherry pick the studies, obviously, that support veganism, and any studies that don't support veganism, they're not gonna like highlight them, obviously.
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, I totally understand why you'd think like that, and I mean, I used to think the same way as well. That a lot of, obviously, it's a true thing that a lot of people will have the confirmation bias, right? You're looking for what you want to see. However, this goes against the scientific principle, the hierarchy of evidence. The way research is supposed to happen in the medical field is that you're supposed to take a complete look at all of the evidence. And as far as I'm aware, and I've seen in Nutrition Facts, this is exactly what they do. They talk about all the research that's been done in that area. They don't just talk about research that is pro vegan or pro plant based. They have other research as well that might say that eggs are good, but then usually, they look at the research and they say, okay, well, you can clearly see that this research isn't as high quality as some of the other research, right? But it's always about looking at the the consensus, if you will, the balance. And this is what I always talk about. And again, I would try to, if we're doing this hypothetical situation here, I'd say, I totally understand. I used to think the exact same way. And I was very, very surprised when I found out, through going to medical school and all this kind of stuff, that the way that the evidence-based world works, it's not about finding a study. You can find a study to support any point of view in the world. One study is just a very, very small piece to a very large puzzle. So that is the issue when talking about studies. Are very, it's almost kind of like talking about anecdotal evidence, like, I know a smoker who lived until 110. Well, I can find you a study that says bacon is good for you, right? I can find that study. Or a study that says the researchers found no difference between people who ate more bacon than less bacon, or whatever, right? So what is important in the world of science is not single studies or even small groups of studies. It's the balance. It's the consensus. It's the large bird's eye view, the large, big perspective point of view when it comes to what is the entire research saying. And this is why it's so difficult, because most people don't have time or even the ability to go and sit through hundreds, if not even thousands of papers on a topic. And this is why it is so important that we have teams of professionals, people who are actually, they are qualified and credible in this regard. They have the skills, they have the knowledge, this is what they do for a living, going through these hundreds and hundreds of papers to give us the most balanced point of view in this in this field. And this is, for example, the World Health Organization, when they came with a report of the carcinogenicity of meat, they went through almost 1,000 papers with, dozens, I think it was 22, scientists, professionals, one top experts working on this for a very, very long time. And these are the conclusions they came to. And then you go, okay, well, I found this study, and then you hold it up against, this massive compilation of work, and you're acting as if they're too, they're weighted this. So this is where the problem is. People really need to understand how evidence really works, and understand that the compilations of evidence is so much higher on the credibility scale than single studies. But anyways, going back to the bias, I would just go again. So the thing I like to point out about veganism, and don't get me wrong, you're right, vegans can be biased like anyone else. There are biased vegans, there are biased non-vegans, or everybody has their own biases. But bias is, the definition of bias is a belief in something that is considered to be unfair, right? A belief or a tendency towards for or against something that is considered to be unfair. And the vast majority of people, would you agree that the vast majority of people who are vegan today were not born vegan?
Sure.
Right. Most, at least there's some people who are born vegan now.
No, but most obviously weren't.
Yeah. And then, when it comes to bias, then if they grew up on a meat-based diet, or they grew up on a Western diet, you would kind of see how they would actually be, biased towards eating meat, because that's how they grew up. That was their tradition. That was how their family lived. So in order for these people to actually go vegan, they had to do the opposite of what is, truly bias, which is to go against all of the belief systems, and to actually change their behavior into this new way of living. So, I would say, just because of that fact alone, you could say that probably most vegans are, to a certain degree, at least when it comes to this area, a little less biased than people who are just following the same thing they were born into, following the same traditions of their families and their cultures and their countries, because they've actually taken a look, they've considered and evaluated, and then they've changed. And that is not what bias is about. So, that's something I like to kind of point out, and then, ask people, well, what do you think about it? Do you think there's any truth to that? Or do you think it's all, it's all BS? And take the conversation like that. But it has to be a very kind of understanding and asking questions, rather than no, you're wrong because of this. That's not how you go about it, right?
I think one of the things that I feel pressured, and I think a lot of people feel pressured, is when people start challenging you on things like this. I'm not a researcher, I'm not a doctor. Someone challenges me on the validity, or or they say it's biased. And one thing that maybe I'll share with the viewers is we can take a lot of that pressure off of ourselves if we start thinking in a coaching mindset. So as opposed to always putting pressure on ourselves to have to answer these questions, and to answer and to prove things to people. By the way, I just thought of this now. I don't know if I've ever used this, which is sad, but I'm going to start using it. If somebody, I put myself in that position. What if somebody challenged me on oh, these studies are biased, whatever? I think I would probably come back to them and say, well, okay, let me ask you a question. What sorts of studies, or how many studies, or what would you need to see for you to feel confident that you could be healthy on a plant-based diet? What would you need to see? And all I've done there, as opposed to me having to argue for the validity of this website or these studies, is the conversation refocuses on them and what their needs are and what they're thinking, right? I'm actually causing them to think about what they need to, address this concern that they have. Now they have to answer that. They say, well, I would want to see enough studies by non-vegans, right? People who are not vegan. Great. What if I gave you a website where you could see all these studies by non-vegans? Oh, shit. Now they've said what they need, and you can give them that. Now you can't prove it to them in the moment, but you say, hey, go check out this website. Pretty much, I think probably 90%, 95% of these studies are probably done by people who are not vegan, right? And if you saw those studies, now and this is how you kind of get over and past the health stuff. If you're trying to get people to get to the animal rights conclusions, let's suppose that you went home and you saw hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed studies by non-vegans, right, who studied this stuff and they're not vegan. And let's say you said, okay, I can believe that this is healthy, right? I can believe that like this is healthy for me. Maybe it has advantages, maybe it doesn't, but I can be just as healthy as I am now.
Mm-hmm.
What else would stop you then? And then I just go on to like another objection. What else would stop you if that's not it, from not, good, contributing to this? Because
but
we get,
go ahead. Yeah. No, I was just going to say really good, because like, just for the people listening, look at where your focus is right now when you're talking. Where's your focus? Your focus is not on yourself. Your focus is exactly where you want it to be, which is the other person's thinking, which is awesome. So sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. It's just, I noticed we put and I'm like, I've studied this, so I get it, but in the moment, it's hard, man. Like I still struggle with it, because you feel like you have to answer things to them, and you have to be this like vegan Wikipedia and know everything. Mm-hmm. And the beauty is that you can coach people, you can inspire them to want to go home and learn if you ask them the right questions, and they start kind of connecting what they need to be vegan. Anyway, I'll kind of leave it at that, because we could talk about it for probably several more hours. But I know, guys, thank you so much for. Thank you to everyone who's stuck with us for this long. And if you find it useful, if you want to reach out to either of us, I'll make sure that your links are in the description of the video. My links are always in the descriptions of the video, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions. If you think we can help, happy to do so. Leo, thank you once again. Very much appreciate the time that you spent talking with us. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure. And hopefully we can do something like this again. So thank you so much for having me.
We'd love to. Maybe we can find something we disagree on. Like, I feel like this is a little boring because we agree on everything here. Let's find something we disagree on, then we'll have a little conversation, not a debate. We'll have a conversation about it.
Yeah, exactly. We'll put our theories to the test and see if we can practice what we preach.
All right, brother. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex. Take care.
Take care. Bye, everyone.